Welcome to We're Gonna Run It with Joe Lisi and Terry Bowden, part of the Go for the Two radio network. I'm Joe Lisi, joined by former National Coach of the Year, Coach Bowden. Coach, here we are. It's the month of August, about 18 days away from the start of week 0. The coaches poll came out earlier today. Texas sits at the top. Give me your thoughts about the upcoming season and, more importantly, the Texas Longhorns at number 1.
Well, you can always figure the top 4 or 5 teams. I think you can mix them up and have one above the other, but there's always about the same 4 or 5. Generally, it ties into who's getting the best recruits, who's got the best budget, who's got the best tradition. And we're seeing every now and then you'll see somebody step in. But Texas, it's been going that way. You'd have to say the way things have gone at Texas the last 3 years, they've been heading toward the top. And I think with the quarterback coming back, all the excitement about Arch Manning, all the talent they have there, the success they've had the last couple of years, I got no problem with that. It's early, but I think that's as good a pick for number 1 as any. And I think you take your first 5, they all probably is a good argument. Any of the top 5 could be number 1.
When you look at this poll, because the coaches, here we are in August, right? And
right.
They're asked to rank the top 25 teams, top 10. And you voted it in this poll a number of years during your days at Auburn and throughout the college football, resume in multiple stops. Do coaches just throw teams up like, Texas, it's got to be because of Arch Manning? Do they throw it because they're in the Big 12, ACC? Are coaches really dialed in to this top 25 in any capacity?
I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, Joe. A lot of people don't realize some of the coaches are. And I think, but some of them turn it over to their director of sports information and say, you do it, you pick them, run it by me, stick the list on my desk, and I'll check it because they have other things to do. Unfortunately, that happens some. I think the more you get into this and the older you are, the more you pay attention to it. So I think the majority of the coaches do pay attention. We may not, if it's not our conference or they're not on our schedule, we're probably less likely as a coach to be in tune with a West Coast team or a Northeast team than you would be or I would be as an analyst, because we're looking at everybody and studying everybody, where most coaches are studying the people they play, the people that play the people they play, and people that are doing things that they have to compete against, defend, or they want to emulate.
When you look at the college football playoff last year, and we saw teams like Boise State, we saw SMU get in there. Boise State was somewhat competitive in the loss to Penn State in the second half. At least they made it close to somewhat. Do you believe that the expanded playoff has helped the group of 5 teams? I know you coached at Akron, you coached at UL Monroe, but the whole thought of expansion was to get these group of 5 teams involved in the mix, to give them an opportunity, just the way we see it with March Madness, right? We've expanded now to multiple teams. Are the group of 5 teams, the way it is right now, getting a legitimate shot to compete for a national championship?
I think the top group of 5 conferences are feel that way, but I, without a doubt, every head coach, including myself in my final years, would be able to go into that first team meeting in August and say, man, we got a shot. Let's take it one game at a time. And the problem is many of the teams in the group of 5 have a couple of games that are so hard to play, that you play for money, that's more the problem than them taking and selecting 1 or 2. But I think it adds definitely, because there was a time not that long ago, a couple of years ago, you couldn't say, okay, man, it's all for the championship. Let's go out there and be national champ. It wasn't realistic. Couldn't happen. Now you can say, men, right place, right time, stars aligned, do your job, take them one game at a time. Look where Boise was last year. Look where this team was last year. That can be us. And there are those and that's enough to inspire those players, because those players will want to buy into that. They want to believe that, although we know the odds are not very good.
Yeah, absolutely, Coach. I think when you look at the second and third team, we have 2 Big Ten teams, the defending national champion, Ohio State Buckeyes. You follow that up with James Franklin and Penn State. And the biggest question now for Ohio State is this. They square off with Texas. They went toe-to-toe in the semifinal playoff game. The defense won that. Quinn Ewers looked like a deer in the headlights, especially in the fourth quarter. Down the stretch, couldn't make enough plays. The scoop and score gives Ohio State to win and cover. And now you look at Texas, Arch is there. They lose their big playmaker, Matt Golden. They lose all of Isaiah Bond and some players on defense. But you look at Ohio State. How hard is it? Forget the quarterback, Will Howard, moving on, and your two running backs moving on to the NFL. The fact that he loses now his defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, and his offensive coordinator, Chip Kelly, to the NFL, how big of a loss is that for the Ohio State Buckeyes, especially entering week number 1?
It could be huge. You can make a decision with a coordinator and it doesn't mesh with what you're doing with the head coach's philosophy, just a little bit off, and it changes everything. And so I think coordinators are huge. Nick Saban, I think, was a guy that really said, you know what, I change them every year. I change them every year and we still win. And I think that proved a lot of people wrong. But to me, continuity of your coaching staff is very important. Texas has had great continuity. And they've had great continuity. That's one of the factors why they're number 1. Ohio State has got some new people out there, and that makes it a little bit more difficult to project just how they'll mesh and play as a team. But remember, we're in a new era right now. We're in the NIL portal transfer era, and you've got, just like free agency, you've got a different lineup almost every year, and you don't have a bunch of fifth-year seniors who have been 4 years developing under the same coordinator. Those days are over. So almost the great coordinators have to keep it simple, stupid. They've got to play good base offense, base defense, make sure college athletes can pick up the system and allow players to play football, players to make plays, and don't make the system be the deciding factor, because you can't pick it up in 1 year. You know, the old Mike Leach days when he had a system, and the more the quarterback was into it, he could beat you with that system. But anymore now, you've got about 7 new starters every year from the portal if you're getting good transfers and you're trying to continue to move up. And that makes it a little more difficult. But coordinators are still important because, you know, it's like chess. There's, you know, some people can move the players or the pieces around better than others. It's not the same. I mean, you've got good coordinators. You got guys that are pretty good coordinators. And continuity of staff, though, I think is important. And when you make a change, you've got to hope that blends in well. Yeah. Ohio State's got 2 new ones now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned Will Howard, part of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Julian saying looks like he's going to be at least the starting quarterback week number 1. But, you know, for Ryan Day and this offense, teaching a quarterback, even though he might have some game experience, to start against now the number 1 team in the country, for him and a game plan, do you get him into a rhythm early? Do you look to balance the offense? I know you called plays for a long time. I mean, Ryan Day is up against it right now. How does he get his team prepared with the number 1 team coming to Columbus in the Horseshoe?
Well, remember, too, this is Arch Manning's first starting assignment. And so both teams are probably, and they both have good running attacks. They have a chance to be good running teams. Don't be surprised if we don't see a pretty conservative game plan by both teams. Run the football, play great defense, and let your quarterback get a feel for the start. Arch Manning, I don't care how much he's projected to do and to be, it is his first starting assignment, the most notoriety of any quarterback in America. And so they've got to move him into it as well. Sometimes, we have it down here in the South where we watched Archie Manning play, and he's part of our Southern lore. Because his name's Arch, we just assume all that stuff is exactly like grandfather, you know, it's like Arch Man. And so he's got to blend himself into it. So I think because both of these teams have talent, and both these teams can play defense and can run the football, they've got to build their quarterback into the system and don't see them coming out throwing 8 straight times to start the game. I don't think that'd be the furthest thing from what I would expect from these 2 coordinators.
Now, Arch Manning is the front runner to win the Heisman this year. You mentioned Archie Manning, his uncle, Eli, and Peyton, great players and Super Bowl champs in the NFL and great college players. But there's been the argument, and we've heard it in the offseason, well, if Arch Manning was so good, Coach, why didn't Sarkisian go to Quinn Ewers in the regular season, you know, and keep him into the college football playoffs and the semifinal playoff loss? And, I back Sark in that sense because Quinn Ewers got you to a college football playoff appearance a couple of years ago. He was battle tested in a big spot. You can go with Quinn. If he didn't step up, then you could always roll the dice with Arch coming off the bench. And they utilized him to a degree against Ohio State. He looked like he got a little bit banged up, but do you think Sarkisian made the right decision in keeping Quinn Ewers as the starting quarterback in the college football playoff?
I think he did. Of course, Sarkisian is a old quarterback himself, and A.J. Milwee is the quarterback coach. He was my offensive coordinator for 9 years at North Alabama.
Yep.
He was my coordinator and went with me, and so I was with him a long time. I know how he works with quarterbacks. Some quarterbacks can't handle that. They expect you to stick them up there, but Arch Manning comes from a football family. They understand waiting your time. They understand that you have to learn some as a backup position. I think knowing who he was, his family background, his family's understanding of how a quarterback develops, made it something you could do with him you might not be able to do with another quarterback whose ego would be so deflated by him getting all that notoriety, but I'm still sitting the bench, that they would have been ones that they would have been so afraid he'd jump in the portal that they're going to play him whether he's ready or not. So, Texas came awful close last year to winning the entire thing. So it's hard to say that Sarkisian's wrong with the decisions he made.
Absolutely. And I said that the defense actually carried them. Them and Notre Dame, I mean, they held opposing quarterbacks to a 52% completion percentage. They did struggle in the second half against Arizona State. Will Howard had a very good game. I mean, that whole game against Ohio State, if you're Texas, that screen pass to Travion Henderson right before the half is an absolute dagger, right? You're within striking distance. It's one thing to allow the kid to catch the pass. It's another thing to let him go 73 yards for a touchdown. You got to wrap him up. And that's a big problem, I think, on the college level. We see it in the NFL. And you talk about these defensive backs, right? They can cover in space, but they can't tackle. I mean, that's another issue as it relates to just coaching hours and practice hours that we've seen, like a lack of tackling at the college and NFL level.
But Joe, you couldn't be more right. We don't teach tackling anymore because we're afraid to. The helmet is we're so much into making sure our face is removed from the tackle that you put your head down low and you don't see who you're going to tackle. You lose all your technique and your fundamentals, and you no longer get tackling's not a natural instinct. Now, natural athletes are better at tackling than non-natural athletes. Deion Sanders, when he played for my dad, they didn't have to teach him tackling. He would just kind of sling them down. He never aggressively ripped their head off type of deal, but he was able to athletically tackle people. But it's not a normally just something you learn how to do from naturally. You got to be taught the proper way to tackle. And I do believe that's one thing that's changing now because of the fear of head contact. And it's really worse. We put our heads down so low, we lose sight of who we're tackling. And we've got all kind of techniques. So the other thing is, don't ever let somebody score with 2 minutes left. The last 2 minutes of the first half, the last 2 minutes of the game are the most important parts of the game because you let a team go into the dressing room demoralized from a late score, and it affects how they come out.
Yeah, absolutely. When we look at the top 25, we see this Penn State team, and I've been critical of James Franklin. I've been critical of Drew Aller, and I understand putting them at number 3. I understand that on paper, potentially they have the most experienced offense in the conference, but I have a problem with a quarterback that hasn't stepped up or lived up to expectations, a quarterback that in the college football playoff loss to Notre Dame couldn't hit a wide receiver because he was so inept, that when he played in his house in Happy Valley against Ohio State and has a 10-0 lead, he throws for 120 yards and can't steal the game in the fourth quarter. Why should I buy into this guy in 2025 because he's more experienced when he hasn't done it up until this point in his career?
Well, they've been in the hunt, and they are better. And Penn State has been a contender. You don't know why some programs it takes something to cross over and to get to that championship level. You're close. All of a sudden, you get the label, and Penn State's having to carry that right now. They can't quite get it done. They can't win the big one. I don't want to take people too far back, but I had a guy I was pretty close to named Bobby Bowden and Tom Osborne at Nebraska. If you remember,
Yeah.
they were the guys that could almost win the championship. And then in the decade of the 90s, but my dad won 2 and Tom Osborne won 3, all between the ages of 64, 63, and 69 years old. I just sometimes when you can get your team in the hunt every year, if you don't win it, you got to be careful how people perceive you. But I have a hard time knowing how hard it is to get to that point, and to see Penn State there now. I just think eventually it's going to get that point. It's about getting the great quarterback in the perfect situation.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see if they could do it. I still think potentially Oregon, I still think some other teams, even maybe Michigan, could bounce back. I can't just back Penn State right here, right now. The team I can back, Coach, and I'll tell you why, is the Georgia Bulldogs. They sit at number 4 right before Notre Dame that beat them in the college football playoff semifinal. Obviously, Carson Beck goes down. Gunnar Stockton comes in, wasn't prepared for that matchup. An experienced defense really took advantage of Gunnar Stockton. But when you look at Kirby Smart and you look at what he has built there, and you talk about modern day success, eerily similar to Nick Saban. If he would have won 3 straight national championships, you could have made the argument modern day he might have been better than Nick short term, right? Even though Nick had 7, he had 6 at Alabama, 1 at LSU. Nick never won 3 straight. So they were close and really competing for that. They didn't make the playoff a couple of years ago. And then when you just look at this situation now, I buy more into Kirby because of how he's recruited over the years in the interior line. I don't care about Gunnar Stockton. I don't care that they might be a little light Nate Frazier at the running back position. They have Lawson Lucky and Oscar Dell coming back. I believe more in Kirby to coach that team up better than any of these coaches that we're talking about right now. Do you see that as a factor, or do you feel Texas in a one-game situation potentially can knock off Georgia?
Georgia, first of all, very few coaches even dream of getting a championship, much less back-to-back. People don't realize how hard back-to-back national championships are. Doesn't happen, almost ever happens, and they pull that off. Then all of a sudden you're expecting 3 in a row. That doesn't happen. I still think Georgia, where they fell short is they could not run the football like they have run. Kirby believes in great defense. Run the football, control the football, and throw it when you want to throw it, not when you have to. We found them last year not being able to run the football well enough and having to throw it, and the quarterback always getting in trouble either with sacks or late quarterback. Kind of like Nussmeier at LSU. They couldn't run the football. A lot of second half interceptions, and it was all his fault. So I think Kirby, the key, and I do think he has a mindset. He's got a staff. And he's got a system right now, very much like Nick Saban, because he's going to take from Nick all the little things that made their program great. He's got those all set in at Georgia, so I think he will. He's definitely a contender. He's in that top 4, but I think again, for them to have the type of team, they'll play great defense, have a great running attack, tight end game, and let that complement the new quarterback.
Notre Dame.
Yep.
Can you win still running the football and just relying on a dominant defense? Because that's what they have. They average 200 rushing yards per game. They held opposing quarterbacks for much of the year to about 50% completion percentage. They had 14 touchdown passes allowed to 19 interceptions. They were opportunistic. My question is, if CJ Carr, let's just say, is adequate, is that enough to lead you to a national championship? Because I look at this team and I say, Marcus Freeman has done a fantastic job. The one thing for me that stands out above the rest, and people look at Northern Illinois, and I understand that was a bad loss, but they rebounded from that. Not only that, but they were 8-1, Coach, on the road or on a neutral field site. And I understand some of those teams were like Army and Navy, but they still knocked off Penn State. They still knocked off Georgia. They came from behind in the second half to challenge Ohio State. This team was battle tested. And when you can win on the road, that's a mindset that's very difficult to beat, especially if you're a good team. I like Notre Dame. I still think they're a top 5 program with or without CJ Carr being, a world quarterback.
He's got to be a good manager because they have an outstanding defense. They've got the talent level that you've got to be a championship team. They've got a little something left that they know they've got to get to. They didn't get as far as they wanted to get. They've still got something to prove. To me, a quarterback doesn't have to be a great NFL quarterback. I think you have to have a great quarterback to win a national championship, but greatness comes in managing the offense, getting the ball to the right people, being the right kind of leader. You can go back over championship teams in the last 20 years of college football. A lot of those quarterbacks were great college quarterbacks, not necessarily in the NFL. So the key is that he's got to be solid. He's got to do things, not turn the ball over, make good decisions as a leader on that football team. And they've got to win as a football team. But I like this team. I like them. I know they're going to Miami. That you remember that used to be the Catholics versus the criminals. You got the criminals. What a great old classic. The convicts. Yes, right.
That's it.
Catholics versus the convicts. It was a great classic. Now I will say this: the heat could be a factor when you go down from South Bend and go down to Miami for that opening. It's a whole different world. It's a whole different world of heat. And just talking about that game, and I think that could be a factor. I know we've got air conditioning coming out of benches nowadays and all these things they have. But once you start sweating and you start getting dehydrated, that becomes a factor. I don't care what people say when you understand, because once you go below the south of Florida, you get into tropics. And
Right.
that gets to be a real concern for an opening game down in Miami for day or night for Notre Dame.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why the running game will be critical, right?
Yes.
If you could run it and wear down Miami's front seven, you have a shot. Now, you would give the edge to Miami and Carson Beck, the more experienced quarterback, right? He's stepped up. He's played in very difficult environments, SEC
Right.
championship, college football playoff. So he has the potential to really elevate this program. But when you look at Miami as a whole, and you're going from Cam Ward, that stole basically 4 games last year because of his play. And now you have Carson Beck that, let's be honest, didn't live up to expectations last year. You look at the game against Ole Miss, 188 yards, no touchdowns, 1 pick. He throws for 175 against Texas and 3 interceptions. It was the rushing attack that won that game for the Bulldogs. If Carson Beck is inefficient, I think Miami could be in trouble in that matchup. Now, I've said this, and maybe you could disagree. I don't think if Mario Cristobal doesn't lead the team to a college football playoff appearance this year, when is it ever going to happen? And do they move on from Mario?
Well, they're not playing great defense. That's their
Right.
They got a new defensive coordinator. Now, because I think Beck, if he plays a solid football game and, again, does the things that he can do, their biggest problem is last year, especially, they had to outscore people. I mean, they've got too much talent to be a great Miami team, to play like the old days of the Jimmy Johnson and all the national championship years. You played defense. You played great defense, and that's what they haven't done. They've got a new coordinator. They're excited about that. That's where it's all got to start, on defense, because right now Notre Dame's going to go down there, and again, with a team that's going to be I think the over-under for the season for Miami maybe 7.5.
9.5. It's 9.5.
Oh, is it up 9.5?
Yeah.
But Notre Dame's probably 10.5, isn't it?
Yeah, Notre Dame is right in the area as well. Notre Dame has good odds. I'll give you the updated odds. We can look at them. But Miami has the second best price, Coach. Again, right behind Clemson. Clemson is the front runner at plus 120 to win the ACC. You have Miami right there at plus 390. So now this is back-to-back years.
Right.
Miami's expected to at least challenge for an ACC championship, right? You're close. You can't get there. And I talked about it throughout the week. 2 stats that stand out for me and get your take on them. And this is why I bring up Mario. The 2 losses, and I don't count the bowl loss so much because to me, the team was checked out. You know, now with NIL and players moving on to the NFL, you can't count the bowl loss to Iowa State. I'm talking about games that mattered, right? The Georgia Tech and the Syracuse loss. That defense to Georgia Tech allowed Haynes King to convert 64% on 3rd down. They allowed 70% in the loss to Syracuse. So here's the thing. You can't get off the field on 3rd down. Mario Cristobal was known as an interior line guy, a superior offensive line, and he was supposed to coach up the talent on the defensive side. And he hasn't done that defensively. So if this is why you hired him, to really have a mentality and an identity. And he hasn't lived up to that up until this point. That's why I say he's on the hot seat, right? Because if it doesn't happen now and you start to go then 8-4 or 7-6, I said, what's the difference between Mark Richt when he had the team at 11-0 and lost to Pitt and missed out, right? You know, Mark, and where they are right now.
Well, Mario's a grad, and he was a part of some championship football there, and he's an offensive line guy. I don't know how much he steps into the defensive staff meetings and tells them what to do. He hired a new defensive coordinator. He recognizes if they don't fix it on defense, they will never get back in the hunt at Miami, because that's what you build great teams around. Skilled people, great playmakers on offense has always been Miami, and a great defense with great talent on defense, from Ray Lewis to all the great ones. And so that's the key. He got a new coordinator. I don't think Mario is. I mean, he'd have to have a pretty bad season for them to bail on him. I'm just saying is, once you start to lose that swagger, that sense that I'm the guy that's going to lead you to the championship, it's hard to turn that thing back around. So I think in that sense, it's very important this year that get done. Kind of like Florida State and situation there. It's not like you're going to get fired with that kind of salary, but you better start getting that swagger back and turn the thing kind of around, although they're not a top 10 team that we're talking about.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Florida State. They have a very difficult home battle with Alabama, right? They're 13.5-point underdogs, and that's a great transition, because I do want to talk about Alabama. I do want to talk about Mike Norvell. When you look at Kalen DeBoer, and again, you look at this team, and they are loaded with Ryan Williams, and the defense brings back 7 starters. Secondary looks like they're intact with 4 starters coming back. But again, it's Alabama. 9-3 looks good for Auburn, looks good for Vanderbilt, looks good for, even Tennessee in a given year. The Tennessee fans are going to jump at me, but you know what I'm talking about. When you have a team and you have the mad scientist that won 6 national championships, his last game he loses to Jim Harbaugh in the college football semifinal. That's the expectation. That's the norm. And now it's a 9.5 win total again. You lose Jalen Milroe. You have Ty Simpson. The pressure is on Kalen DeBoer. People don't think so, but I said it could be eerily similar to what we saw with Brian Harsin. Now, that would be a real complete fall off if they go, 5-7 or 6-6. But if they're 7-6 or let's say 8-4, that is not the norm in Tuscaloosa.
Well, now, you got to 9-10, you're still having issues there. If you're not in the playoffs, the pressure's on, because it is Alabama, and the question is always going to be, is this guy going to compare to Nick Saban? Just like when I was coaching against Alabama with Gene Stallings was there, the 7 coaches that followed Bear Bryant all left either fired or did not win enough or were not well liked. And even Gene Stallings won a championship, one of them, but then he kind of had to move on. So I think it's a critical season for him to say, we don't take but one thing at Alabama, and that's Bear Bryant's and Nick Saban's. And anything else in between, we've got to move on between them till we get to the next one. So DeBoer, we're going to find out. He had a great resume everywhere he's been. But this is it's funny, Norvell has used the word, this is a desperate year. I want our players to be desperate this year. I don't like that word. Back to the wall. I like get my back to the wall. But at Alabama, for the head coach, I do believe this is a desperate situation that, hey, man, we got to get this thing. So this is a must win for Alabama. It is we must play well for Florida State. Yeah. And because our success, I'll be honest with you, after that last year, for Florida State to get back in the hunt, it's more the next 30 games, not the next 12. It's what can we do in the next 2 years? Can we get 7 or 8 this year and get ourselves in the right direction? Alabama's got to be there this year.
Yeah. I mean, would you ever think if I told you Florida State gets snubbed, and I'll say this, I was a big believer, Florida State undefeated in the regular season, ACC champs. They were deserving 2 years ago to be in the college football playoff. You can't tell me anything else. ACC versus the Big 12, ACC versus the SEC. I don't care. They beat everybody on their schedule. They covered the last 2 games against Florida and Louisville. They did what they had to do to make it to the college football playoff. But knowing what we had 2 years ago, to seeing what we had last year, and the loss to Georgia Tech to start the year was pitiful. especially in Germany. I get
Right.
that with DJU. You know DJU. You were a grad assistant with Clemson when he was there. Okay, we'll give him one game. They then lose to Boston College. After that loss and the season was done, those kids quit. And I'm sorry. And that's on Mike Norvell and nobody else from getting them motivated. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, see, I think that's why he's thrown out this word desperate. I think in his own mind and in his own coaching position, it's desperate. I don't think the players need to think of it that way, but I think he does. Now, like I'm saying, I don't that would he's making 9.7 million a year. And I know Florida State, they throw that big money out there, but it's not like they're about ready to buy it out. But I'm saying is if he's going to get them to that championship level, that they paid that money for a reason to get there. He's got to move in that direction. And it was, I mean, for him, that's, the DJU, I watched him when I was an analyst at Clemson. And I watched, I said, this is an ex-Trevor. This guy looks like Jim Plunkett. He's calm, he's cool. This is what I was saying. I watched him, but it wasn't live. I said, this guy sits in the pocket. He doesn't get flustered. But what it was, and I made the mistake because he didn't have any emotion. He had no fire. He never led. And I took that for calm, cool, and collected. It was that the guy had no ticker that would inspire his team and rise to difficult situations. Now, Mike might have missed that, but I'm with you. You got to find a way to overcome that. You got to find a way you got to get wins with your backup or the next guy. And I know they were really going after Cam Ward, and they thought they had a chance to get him. And I think that was their first choice, and they didn't. But I mean, that's football. You better have plan A and plan B. And I was just a little bit amazed that FSU did not have plan B. But I believe, like I say, I think Mike Norvell, if he gets 7 or 8 wins, and I think it's somewhere between there this year, that'll get, and people aren't going to be, they wouldn't be happy if you told them that's what they're going to have. But at the end of the season, they're going to a bowl and they've got 7 or 8 wins. They're happier and feeling like they're going in the right direction. DeBoer at Alabama, whole different story.
Well, let me give you, you're right. So let me give you their schedule because when I looked at it, I was shocked at Florida State's schedule, okay, to say this team realistically, even if they lose to Alabama, could win 9 games. So let's go through it. Alabama week 1, right? East Texas A&M at home, Kent State, Virginia on the road. Now, Virginia will have a new starting quarterback, but again,
they should win that.
He's an experienced guy, but you would hope Florida State and Charlotte, your dad knew Charlottesville, not easy. Not easy. Right? Warwick done on that Thursday night, right?
Those Barber brothers were something.
Rondé and Tiki. And then a rivalry game with Miami. Yeah. So you want to give them the loss. There's 2 losses. But then here we go. You got Pittsburgh, winnable at home, right? And then you go Stanford, Wake Forest, Clemson. There's the 3rd loss, I believe. Va Tech at home, NC State, and then Florida. I mean, 8-4 really isn't out of the realm of possibility, but if they steal one of those games, they can be a 9-win football team.
Yeah, they got to beat either NC State and Va Tech. Get one of those 2, and then even if you lose to Florida, you're right. I think it's 8 probably, but you're right. They could get to 9. But like I say, I think bottom line is if they're going to get back to the level they want to be, it's not all going to happen this year, but it's got to happen with talent. He's done a good job recruiting. He did a good job in the portal. The quarterback's cocky. The quarterback is liked by some, disliked by others. But a big factor for Florida State is Gus Malzahn and this dual threat quarterback. Gus Malzahn and Tommy, the quarterback that they have, Castellano from Syracuse. That's a pretty neat combination there. And that may be that X factor that gets him to that 9, get to game season or more. Just the fact that he can do so much in that offense.
Yeah, now you brought up Gus, and I want to bring this up because we saw the same with Chip Kelly, right? Chip Kelly, transitioning from UCLA, turning down a head coaching job basically to be an offensive coordinator, now a national champion, and he's moved on to the NFL. You think the older coaches, because of NIL, and I've said this because of Nick moving on, that, Nick built basically a dynasty because that train was in motion, right? Where it's my way or no way, and this is the way we do it, and either you buy in or you buy out, right? And you want to be a winner and you want to make it to the NFL, you come to Alabama. Well, you can't, it seems like, and you were in the coaching UL Monroe up until a couple of years ago. The kids just don't buy into that mentality anymore. Now you got to do TikToks. You got to do things to the bag of cash. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think times change, and you've got to relate to them in ways that work today. Again, a lot of the things that we're having to do today, you're saying, well, that's just too much. But we don't have to go back 50. I mean, unfortunately, I go back to the 80s as a head football coach. That's about 5 or 6 decades. And my dad goes back to the 50s, and things change. And what you've got to change and adapt as a head coach and learn how to handle it. And it isn't easy to deal with portal transfers, to deal with the NILs and players wanting to go into you and say, Coach, what kind of money am I going to get? Those things are different now. But I say that's not something new to a new head coach. That's the way it's been since they got to be a head coach. And they probably take it as the way it is, but you've got a whole different ball game when it comes to a lot of the factors that you like. You have to think Nick probably said, I really don't want to live through all that. But Gus Malzahn, you see a lot of these head coaches go into the coordinator titles because it's harder to build a team when you lose your kids. You get a good kid and you lose him in the portal. You don't have any NIL money. And you just can't get it done. You see Gus Malzahn becoming a coordinator, Kelly becoming a coordinator. You go back to the Sun Belt Conference, see the head coach at South Alabama goes to Alabama, the head coach at Georgia State goes to Virginia Tech. I think he went to Virginia Tech or North Carolina. They're saying, you know what, I'm gonna go be a coordinator where I don't have to deal with all that NIL headaches, and I can just coach football. You're seeing a little bit of that now. Yeah, and they're paying about 7 figures for a lot of these coordinators.
Oh yeah, absolutely, right. If you can bring a national championship coordinator, less pressure, just call the plays, and that's what it's all about. We saw Tom Allen go back to Clemson. We'll get into the LSU Clemson game, but you mentioned coaches. It's a great transition. Bill Belichick, right? Could he play? Now they went from Mac Brown to Bill Belichick. They got older, right? But Mac Brown didn't have any Super Bowls, so now you bring in a guy that's won 6 with New England. Could he have the type of success, and I mean ACC championship, college football playoff, forget the quarter, he's got Gio Lopez from South Alabama. Could he get this defense that averaged and gave up 28 points a game? Could he get them down to 13 points a game, 15 points to challenge for an ACC championship in year 1?
Can he? Yes. Will he? I just don't know. There's too many unknowns to me in that deal. Obviously, at New England, they had enough, with the New England team. So they moved him on. And the Carolina thing was kind of an unusual thing to me, but he just wasn't ready to quit coaching. And I will be probably a little bit surprised if everything can happen, because I'm not quite sure what he has to prove and why he's there. Just maybe that he loves the game so much, but that's quite a transition going for a team in the New England where he built that program and built all those the team that they are, and a North Carolina program where he's got to do some building. They're not at the top of the heap right now, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm still baffled by it a little bit, having been a coaching till I coached till I was 68 years old. Him coaching, I guess he's a little bit older than that, but he's
73.
Yeah, but he's at that point where what in the world is he doing there? And why? What's he trying to prove? Because he's already proven that he's one of the best ever in the game of football.
Something tells me I'm going to catch lightning, and I'm buying it. I don't know, Coach. I'm buying it. I'm telling you. So I mentioned the LSU game, right? That's the game. I can't wait, right? You have 2 Death Valleys. We have 2 teams in Cade Klubnik for Clemson. They made it to the college football playoff. He's Heisman odds, all right? You look at Arch Manning. You got 2 Heisman frontrunners there. Cade Klubnik at 9-1, Garrett Nussmeier at 9-1. And you have 2 coaches, right, that are basically, I don't want to say on the hot seat, but it's hot. Let me ask you this. Dabo didn't want to take in transfer talent, right? All of a sudden, You don't win a college football national championship. You get smacked around by Texas. All of a sudden, give me some defensive talent. Give me the JUCO guys, right? And for LSU, I've said this, and my daughter's going there. You know, people call me the LSU homer, but you can't, if you're Brian Kelly, go into Baton Rouge 3 years ago, win an SEC West championship, knock around Nick Saban, and beat him in Death Valley in year number 1 and going for 2 points in overtime, and then slowly regress. You can't do that. It's unacceptable. You have to find a way, Coach, to get to the college football playoff. Which team has more pressure week 1? Kelly, that hasn't won a week 1 matchup in 3 straight years, or Dabo now looking to make some noise and hype week 1 in his house?
That's not even a tough one right there. Kelly has got the pressure. He hasn't won an opening game since he's been there. They lost a couple. I think they've lost 5 in a row. He's lost 3 in a row, 4 in a row. He's got and the pressure's on him. They didn't pay him. They brought him in with a big paycheck to win a national championship. And LSU, the same reason Nick Saban went there, is a program that'll give you what it takes to be a national champion. And so the pressure now is on him. Dabo's won a couple of championships. He got them back in the playoffs last year. I think he's got a real good chance to have as good a team as almost as the old days, because he's got a Heisman type quarterback. But without a doubt, Brian Kelly, the pressure is on him. Now I'm sitting here in Northeast Louisiana, and everybody around here is a Louisiana Tiger, LSU Tiger, and they say win or else. You know. Now I think he's a good coach. I thought he was going to have a better year last year, but I was shocked again how bad their running game was. Because Nussmeier, who I think is an NFL quarterback, all of his terrible plays were second half because they couldn't run the ball, having to catch up, throw it in passing situations, and he got the blame for a lot of things. I was kind of shocked that they didn't fix that in the spring. Now, if they don't have it fixed this year, then you might ought to buy that thing out. You know.
Yeah. I'll say this about Nussmeier: you take the good, you take the bad, you take the ugly. I love the good. But the bad and the ugly have a little bit of Brett Favre in him. He's a riverboat gambler when he's under pressure, and you watch that game play out in the second half against Texas A&M, and you're going, he's being basically sacked, and he's just throwing the football up for grabs. You cannot do that, and you have to find ways to pull these games out. I always judge, and I'm curious for you, good coaches between great coaches. Good coaches are, hey, the game plan works right from the get-go, and we devised a game plan. I happen to think great head coaches are the ones where the game plan offensively and defensively might not work. But you know what? In-game, right from the get-go. But an in-game and a halftime adjustment, we're going to figure it out to grind and motivate and get these guys in a position to win. Do you see that as well on the college level? Because I think there's some coaches in college, and I've said this, Lincoln Riley hasn't won a big game yet. He gets out coaching, and when the game plan works, it's all well and good. USC rolls. When they get smacked in the mouth and they have to make adjustments, Lincoln Riley fails. Do you see that as well as being the difference between good and great head coaches?
Well, when you look at the entire body of work of any coach, it's what they do at halftime. And I want to say this more importantly, what they do between every series. You have a week to prepare for a game. And so you watch video of the other team and you prepare a specific game plan for that team. You do what you do well, but you add the wrinkles. Well, they're sitting there looking at your video. Now, they do what they do well, but they add their wrinkles. So here you get to the game, the first series, they're doing something entirely different than what you thought they were doing, or you're doing something different than they thought. And so you've got to come off the field the first series and make your on-the-field adjustments. You've got to be able to do it that quickly, and a good coordinator, a good head coach can make those kind of decisions. That's why you can't be too much into analytics. You can't be too much into the odds say do this, the odds say do that. No, what does this game say to do? What does this instance right now say to do? I've got to react, change, and move forward with a new game plan almost continually throughout the game.
I say gut and feel sometimes works and wins. You know what? Throw the analytics out the window.
That's right.
I've always said sometimes in every shipwreck, there's a chart at the bottom of the ocean, right? Sometimes you got to go with gut and feel, and the pulse of your team, right?
There's quarterback. There's coaches who believe it's all cerebral, and those who believe that it's a lot visceral. It has a gut feeling, and you got to go with your gut. I don't know how many times. What's the saying that we have for our show? You just got to run it. You
Run
got to go
it.
run the dang thing. I know
That's
it.
it.
That was my dad's one of his favorite sayings. My dad was a great play caller through his career, and he would be up there and he'd have some newfangled Bowden Ruski or Pun
Right, yeah,
Ruski or
Ruski,
something,
yeah.
and the coach say, "No, coach, no, coach." He'd say, "Dad, gummit, run the thing, run
Right.
it, run it," and they would run it. But that's a gut feel, and you got to have it to be a great one.
Like, and you bring up a great point because in your dad's day with the Punarooski in 1988 with Leroy Butler, we don't see a lot of head coaches now take risk. And what I mean by that is that you don't see a lot of trick plays. You don't. It's just. I don't want to say status quo or vanilla, because they run the spread and 5 wide and they have all these unique passing plays, but you don't see risk enough, I think, on the college level. And that's where, and I've said this, you're getting paid $11-12 million. We're not paying you to do the game plan before the game. I'm paying you to make adjustments during the game and have a pulse on your team and call those shots to potentially win a national championship. I've seen it time and time again, timeouts, time management. It's just incredible on how some head coaches just rely on others to make those calls, right? It really is incredible.
You kind of answered your own question. You said they're making $10-11 million a year. They got to make those calls. They're afraid to make the calls because they're making so much dang money that they'll be, and you're being scrutinized immediately on the internet, social media, 15 different camera views. They're afraid to make that call, just like you see officials who are afraid to raise their hands for a touchdown because they're afraid they're going to be proven wrong. And that's a big problem, is that there's a little bit of fear. The other thing, and this happened to me when I was when I first went to Auburn in the early 90s from Sanford, I was still in the 11 personnel I formation.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, we're all starting to go with the 4 wideouts, no huddle, fast break. My dad did it with Charlie Ward. I started doing it with Damian Craig. My brother Tommy was really good with Sean King. But once you start doing, I can remember my dad, me being an assistant for him, saying, "I don't know where the quarterback's going to throw the ball. I don't know where it's going. I don't know where it's going. How can I call a trick play when we're going so fast? I don't know where the ball's going to go. I want to know where the ball's going to go so I can make it go trick. I can go somewhere else with it." And so a lot of that changed the transition to a fast-paced action where we tried to win systematically with a system instead of player personnel. My dad, he came up and I came up in player matchups. You want to put your top receiver on the weakest cornerback, or you want to overload this and not just going playing fast and catching people out of position. But also you got to have some gut feel for when it's time to call something. Just like to me, it was always like a stand-up comedian. When I call plays in the SEC, it was almost like that stand-up comic who knows when to hit that punchline. You got to catch them when they're not expecting it and hit that punchline.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you what, that's what I love about coaches that take risk, especially when we talk sports wagering and the gambling perspective. When you're banking on an underdog, you want to see that coach try and knock out either the favorite or the champ in any type of situation. You want to go toe to toe, especially when you're catching points in that type of situation. So we'll see. This is our first episode. We're going to be on throughout the week. We're going to be breaking down week 0, week number 1. Coach, right now, before we go, in your opinion, if you had to pick a national champion right now, just early in August, are you back in Texas? Are you back in Notre Dame? Are you back in Ohio State? I'll say this. I've said it throughout the offseason. I'm not backing down. The Georgia Bulldogs, to me, are still the team to beat.
Well, you ruined it for me because I was going to say the Bulldogs.
There you go.
Because of that, now I'm going to say if you're going with the odds, you're going with Texas. But I'm saying I got this feeling that it's time for the Bulldogs to be right back on top.
Yeah, Coach and I will be with you all week long right here on We're Gonna Run It. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you throughout the week.